It is Money Talks. It is John Gibbons with football finance expert Dave Powell to have a little look at what's going on off the pitch in terms of club finances, in terms of FSG and anything else that we think is going on within the Premier League and beyond of interest. And so Dave, well, thanks a lot for coming in. First of all, coming back to see us, appreciate it.
Always enjoy it, but I thought our agenda's changed significantly over the past few days. I mean, last week when you said, let's come in and talk about buying Bordeaux, now it's, do you want to come in and talk about not buying Bordeaux? So
well, news doesn't stop.
Money talks for some wine, to be fair.
Money talks 24 hours a day. I mean, that would have been nice.
I thought we were going to set the scene and just
we could have done that.
Some brie crackers or
We should have done it in Petit Cafe on Berry Street. Put some cheese and wine in next time. But
the next French club they acquire will do that. Yeah.
But it doesn't look like it's going to be Bordeaux, because they've had a little look and Bordeaux have let us know, / their shareholders know, who are obviously the most important people within football, that it's not going to happen after all.
No, I mean the idea behind it, the nucleus of it all, was Michael Edwards coming back into the fold early part of the year as head of football for FSG instead of just being a sporting director. One of the big carrots they dangled was acquisition of another football club, whether it be in Europe, South America, to help Liverpool ultimately with talent ID and housing talent which they acquire to try and find greater value in the transfer market, etc. Now they've looked. I mean, we're fairly early on in this search. I mean, when was this? March time they were first talking about kind of adding football clubs to the portfolio. We're now in July, quite soon on. But they've identified Bordeaux opportunity which kind of presented itself really. The distressed asset. For someone like you and I, Bordeaux are historically a giant of French football, up there with Marseille, etc. I remember Champions League quarter-finalists in 2010, I think. Yeah. They're 6 times champions of France. So they're a club with a big fan base, big history, but also big amount of debt and financial issues. So last week they were before French football's financial ombudsman, talking about how they were going to present a budget for the year ahead, and provisionally what happened was they were, as a result of that meeting where FSG were present, so FSG had some representatives sent over from Boston to be present at the meeting, they were provisionally placed in the 3rd tier of French football, the Championnat National, given 2 weeks to sort their house out and come back with a workable budget for the following year. Now, key to them doing that, while they still, that 2 weeks is still ticking for them, but key to them doing that was for FSG to become majority shareholders in the club. The issue being that FSG had, even though there was this 2-week gap, the talks FSG stressed when they first made mention of it was that they were exploratory talks, early stage. So it makes sense that they've kind of had a look and realised fairly early doors this isn't for them, because the clock is ticking on Bordeaux. They couldn't leave it run longer than it needed to be, because ultimately now Bordeaux have got to pivot and find someone else, because they are a club for reasons we'll explain in a minute, though, that ended up in a kind of significant amount of debt and facing 3rd tier of French football, which isn't like the 3rd tier of English football. It's it gets to the pyramid isn't as strong in France as it is over here.
You're not getting crowds of 20,000 like you might get in League One.
There were some kind of reserve teams in the 3rd tier of French football, and the media rights drop off a cliff anyway. Media rights is one of the main reasons why this all came to a head anyway. I mean, there was to kind of skirt back to the reason why Bordeaux were in such a mess. It was because they had a failed takeover attempt by US businessman Joe DeGrossa back in 2018. His backers, an US investment fund, ended up taking Sixth Street. They ended up taking a controlling stake in Bordeaux by accident, really, because they were so far down the line with it. Then they sold it to a businessman, Gerard Lopez. But in between all this, we've had a pandemic, and European football was hammered by the pandemic, but French football particularly so, largely because they agreed a multi-year deal with a firm called MediaPro in 2020, early 2021. Now that deal was supposed to be kind of a bit of a game changer for French football, because they were promising sums that would have not significantly closed the gap between kind of French football and La Liga and the Premier League, but would have gone some way to starting to make ground on those leagues. Clubs thought they had the money in the bank, so they were spending on wages, transfers, etc., because they were relying on that revenue. But a few months into the deal, MediaPro started to default on payments, and a couple of months later, the deal collapses, and French football has to go to market again, with Amazon and Canal Plus paying significantly less for the rights. So that's been to the kind of detrimental effect of French football, and it's still not recovered from that really. But Bordeaux hit particularly hard by that, and especially given the fact that they were already in kind of financial dire straits before all this hit, it's just been kind of a snowball effect really. But for someone like FSG looking at it, it's a business folk look at distressed assets and they buy them when the price point is the lowest it possibly can be. Look at what they did with Liverpool. They got it for a song really, it was described as the epic swindle, wasn't it? So they got it for a song. So that's what they look for, to buy at the low price. But the challenges to turning around the business are probably too onerous for them to take on board for what they want it for.
It was interesting that was the club that they went for, though, because I think when multi-club was first mentioned, I think the assumption maybe from some of us was that they would be looking to acquire a club that would be ultimately beneficial to Liverpool, and that might be, for many reasons. But I think when you look at it from a player recruitment idea, the idea you could buy a South American club where some of these players could play, or a club in a country like Portugal, where it often is the first step for South American players to come over. But also, there's plenty of Portuguese talents that Liverpool have bought over the years too. But a club maybe, in one of those countries where the players could play until they were ready to move to a club of Liverpool's size, but also, with the work permit issues and the kind of reasons why Liverpool haven't been able to secure some of these players. Bordeaux didn't necessarily fit into that category. It looked like it was more what you've said, the fact that it was a distressed asset, the fact that, they could see the potential of Bordeaux, and the fact that it looked a good time to get them. So it appeared to be, although it hasn't happened, it's still quite interesting that Bordeaux was the club that they went for, because it seems like they have looked at it from a point of view of just buying a football club rather than what it means to necessarily to Liverpool.
I think that while things like the Portuguese market open a door to South American talent, which you've seen with Luis Diaz, etc., the French market does it similarly for African talent, and it also has kind of world-class academies throughout the country, and they're really good at pooling talent in these academies. So a large city like Bordeaux, you look at some of the players they've produced in more recent times. I mean, Zinedine Zidane's a kind of example of years gone by, but Aurélien Tchouameni was a product of Bordeaux's youth academy. Obviously a player that Liverpool courted a few years back, a couple of years ago, and that type of thing is what they would have looked at and thinking, well, why would we be going to market and paying all this money when we could, effectively house this kind of talent within our own network? So there's that aspect of it. Also, it's probably easier for players to acclimate to kind of the French system, sort of things like the weather, the style of play, all these things, make a difference. Also, there is a reasonable route to European competition, which is handy if you wanted to try and test your players and build up your GBP points in order to get work permits, etc. You look at what Redbird have done with Toulouse. They acquired the club after they fell into League Two. It was not in as dire straits as Bordeaux is, but it was struggling significantly. They turned that around, got it into League One, and then they qualified for the Europa League for last season's campaign. Obviously, they were paired against Liverpool. So there are benefits to that French market, but I think that the reason for it was the fact that they had the chance to acquire a big club with potential, but also one that that has a history of producing good talent and access to good talent, good pipelines for it all. Problem is that reason for its collapse is that it didn't have what the challenges that it brought were too onerous, really, and operationally it would have taken a significant amount of manpower and effort to turn around the situation. They don't own the stadium. It's a fantastic stadium in Bordeaux. It's a 45,000 seater stadium built in 2015, state of the art, but the local authority own it, which means there's no tangible asset for FSG to acquire. They could have bought it off the local council, but again, that comes with a significant capital expenditure, and would they get that kind of money back in the long run remains to be seen. But also the fact that what I mentioned before about French football is in a bit of tumult still, and it's struggling to, the losses are only getting bigger.
Yeah.
The money that's coming in from media deals isn't getting any larger. There was some talk recently of a private equity firm coming into CVC partners coming in to try and bridge that gap if the media deal was too low. So it's an ecosystem, a football economy which is really, really struggling at the moment and has a lot of risk. And given the fact that they haven't really had the time to do a lot of due diligence on the deal, given the fact that you've got a ticking clock of 2 weeks, when we're already 5 days into that, I suppose, that they've kind of pulled the plug on it quite quickly in order to both look elsewhere, but also, I suppose, to try and give Bordeaux as much time as possible to try and find someone else to step in.
Is there any indication in particular what they didn't like then? Because some of the issues there they'd already known about before they came to the table. So it's excellent points on the issues around sort of French football and things that are there at the moment, and then also problems that are specific for Bordeaux. But they would have known that before they stepped into the market, if you like, or certainly sort of begun negotiations or discussions or due diligence, whatever it might be. So is it a case that they've had a bit more of a look under the bonnet, to use the old analogy, and there's a couple of things there that you thought, well, a few surprises there that you thought, well, there's a few more risks here than even the ones we could have reasonably identified? Yeah,
I mean, because you're coming in, you're already dealing with heavy debt, which you'd want to pay down, and then you go about how you change the culture and the playing squad and everything that comes with it. But I spoke to one investor in the US last week about this, and the deal itself, and he said it was one that maybe didn't make... It made sense in terms of acquiring it from a low price point for a big club, but from an FSG standpoint, requires a lot of heavy lifting. And I'm not too sure whether they have the appetite for taking on that kind of challenge, because it's the idea being it's supposed to help eventually kind of with this flow of talent and nurture talent through the FSG portfolio, ultimately to benefit the Liverpool, which sits at the top. While it's said they were stressing that it's independent, the end game is to try and help Liverpool achieve and succeed in the market for a lesser cost, really. So it is what you've said. They've probably gone in, had a look at what needs doing, the kind of capital that's needed immediately to sort some pressing problems out. Operationally, what's needed to be done. And I think what is one of the key things is the fact that the stadium, maybe that with some discussions with the local authority, they weren't as forthcoming around selling the stadium to them for a good price. But also the fact that there is so much uncertainty around French media rights, which is still kind of going through the motions of the tender process. It probably means that to make such a snap decision in a short time frame, they don't do things on the fly, FSG, really. It's never really been the case. It's always been considered. I mean, this was an opportunity which presented itself because you effectively have Bordeaux at its lowest ebb.
Yeah.
Heading to a meeting with French football's financial ombudsman, and then having to make its case. Got 2 weeks to make its case. They're probably thinking in terms of making a serious snap decision. It's not, maybe there were too many red flags for them to be comfortable about making that the first acquisition of this FSG football portfolio, because the holding company was registered with Companies House this past week.
Yeah.
So the wheels are in motion for it all. But I just think maybe the risk against the potential reward was maybe a little bit too much for them.
Yeah, I'm going to come on and ask you where this sort of leaves FSG, but where it leaves Bordeaux is slightly worrying for them, isn't it? And that's the real shame. And it's interesting because, I come at it from the angle of someone who is against multi-club in theory and doesn't sort of sit right with me, but there's been against things in theory and there's been against things in practice. And when I saw that they were looking to take on Bordeaux and learn more about the dire states that they were in, because it's not something that is part of my day-to-day sort of reading. I thought, well, actually, if I was a Bordeaux fan, I'd be quite pleased here that these people who've got a good track record of running football clubs, sometimes from a Liverpool point of view, we'd like them to be bolder and kind of things like that. But, you can't argue with, the success that they've had, in terms of stability and success, at Liverpool. And so I'm sure there would have been Bordeaux fans, plenty of them, who were sort of quite pleased with the idea of FSG buying Bordeaux, and that's always been the sort of litmus test for me, is that I'm against the multi-club model, because I think it erodes the identity of the smaller clubs who are within the structure. And like we say, we grew up with Bordeaux being a big club, but I don't think it's too patronising to say right now they are a smaller club than Liverpool. But in practice, it might have got them to a better state, and now they're without that, and I guess they're just left with uncertainty, and like you said before, a ticking clock.
Yeah, but I'm against the idea really of multi-club ownership, because for the reasons you've said. I mean, I think it threatens individual identity of football clubs, and that's. I think it poses. Not all multi-club models are built the same, I must say.
Of course, yeah.
Some are completely independent of each other. Some people just own multiple football clubs. They have no, there's no real crossover between them. Whereas some try and find that link that goes to them all. So City Football Group, for example. But I think from some of the comments from Bordeaux fans that I saw, yes, some are against it because, for the reason we've just said, because you only have to look at what happened with Chelsea's owners, Blueco, when they acquired Strasbourg, that incurred heavy flack for that, and they still do. 777 Partners, we haven't mentioned them for a while.
Old friends.
Our old friends at 777. They acquired Red Star Paris a couple of years back, and Red Star Paris is like a heavily socialist football club, and that kind of flies in the face of what it stands for, really. So obviously that didn't go down well, and operationally that's not been run particularly well either.
Yeah.
But I think for Bordeaux, when you are given a deadline of 2 weeks before you're relegated to the third tier, you are facing enormous debt and you have limited options. You're stuck between a rock and a hard place, really. FSG do have a track record of running sports teams responsibly, maybe not as ambitiously as some people would like, and I understand that, but certainly they are responsible sports team owners. So that, I think, would have allowed them some favour with fans. But for Bordeaux, it places an enormous amount of risk, because there isn't the willingness from loads and loads of people to go and acquire football clubs at the moment, because interest rates are high. There's a lot of the value when people tend to buy football teams now, they're buying them for the price of buying them at a certain price and hoping that the value will accrete over time. They're not buying it for profit and loss every year and to take dividends, because football clubs, newsflash, don't make money. 95% of them are loss-making businesses. They don't make money. It's kind of it's always seen as kind of a fool's a fool's game to get involved in football. It's purely for vanity. But now it's if you acquire the right team in the right market, you'll get a return on your investment through a future sale. French market doesn't really have that at the moment, because media rights is what allows for all that to happen. So the strength of media rights is what grows value of your teams. So when you don't have that, all you're left with is it doesn't move the needle. So there probably wouldn't be the exit value that FSG might want for the money they'd have to invest. But for Bordeaux, it just puts them in it's dire straits, meaning they've got effectively a week to find some saviour. And that doesn't have to be a full change of ownership. It could be just finding some investment and now allow them to have a workable budget for the forthcoming season. But for a club like that to be in a situation like that, like I said, it strikes me a similar situation to Malaga when they broke into the Champions League early 2010s, was it? I think they got to the quarterfinals themselves, and they'd spent lots and lots of money acquiring well-known players who just kind of left the Premier League, and they all ended up going wrong, and they were relegated through the league. So it's smacks of that, really. But I mean, there's a Liverpool link there. When Redbird took a very, very small stake in Malaga about 4 years ago, which they never did anything with looking at potentially acquiring that, which they didn't in the end. So, as a football fan, and someone that very much thinks that these clubs are the beating heart of communities and cities. It's a sad state of affairs, but ultimately I think FSG have probably tried to give Bordeaux as much notice as they possibly can to try and find something else. But obviously, I think as we spoke about before, I think the risk is just probably too great for them.
So what next for FSG then? Do you think they'll look in the French markets again, or is it not necessarily as simple as that? Do you think that the world is their oyster or buffet, depending on how you want to look at it?
Definite buffet, isn't it? So, I think they're one of the few ownership groups that can be choosy. I don't think it'll be a rush to do something immediately. I think it'll be the right opportunity. So this, because of the price point of Bordeaux and given its situation, was seen as an opportunity. And they've always been opportunistic. So when NBA teams came up for sale in the US, which was the Minnesota Timberwolves, Phoenix Suns, they looked at it because it was an opportunity. So when an opportunity presents itself, they'll assess. But I think the French market makes some sense for the reason we discussed before about access to talent from Africa. There's strong academies, fairly geographically it's close, style of play similar. So there are those things, but I also think that the real direct line always seemed to be Portugal, didn't it? Because they hired Pedro Marques from Benfica. It's a market they've had success in shopping in recent times, paying good money for players who cost small amounts not too long previously. But also then you've got, I think Japan offers some opportunities for them if there's the right opportunity there, because you look at the stream of Japanese talent which comes into European football now. I mean, Brighton owner Tony Bloom acquired Union Saint-Gilloise, and they placed the likes of Kara Matoma with USG and then over to Brighton. So obviously Liverpool have Wataru Endo. So it's I think it's a market which is starting to really blossom. But Belgium, the Netherlands, those type of countries seem to, they'll likely be on the radar as well. German football may be a little bit too cost prohibitive in terms of what they're seeking, because the team values are a little higher. Competitively, the kind of second tier is, if you look at some of the teams in the second tier in German football, it's a real kind of slugfest because there's some big teams down there now. And I think it's going to be it'll be one of the smaller market teams. And French football is a smaller market now, it just is because of the media rights and the fact that there's only PSG which really hold the value of the French market up. So, any access to talent from South America, Asia or Africa will be where they look. But also it'll come down to price and how much legwork is required to really get this thing up and running. and working as it should be. I think the Bordeaux project, while on the face of it seemed like a really attractive one, I think the amount that they would have to do to get it to where they need it to be was quite onerous.
Just before we let you go, Liverpool off to America next week. They play 3 games. Yep. It's the first time in America for a while since pre-COVID. The last 2 tours, they've done Singapore. There was a one Singapore that was combined with Thailand. But it's interesting they're going back this summer. You know, they talk about, you know, getting out there to the fans and things like that. But, you know, America is obviously a strategic market to them for many reasons. You know, there's a growing Premier League interest. Liverpool are one of the biggest clubs that people tend to take up. Obviously, there's existing supporters over there, but there's a lot of Liverpool supporters in Indonesia, but I don't think they're going there anytime soon. And so there's a reason that they pick the countries that they do, and it's not just the dedicated fan base. It's, I guess, it's partnerships, it's growth markets, and it's what's going to ultimately try and increase the value of the club in the future.
Yeah, I mean, you know yourself from first-hand experience what the strength of the US market's like, because, you know, from the shows that the Anfield Wrap do from there, you know, which I've been fortunate to be a part of one of them early on this year. But yeah, the US we're at a kind of moment in time with it, really, and I think we've spoken about this previously. After USA '94, there was expected to be this big surge in interest in football, or soccer, obviously, colloquially now. There was supposed to be a real surge in it. Now, the MLS was created on the back of USA '94, and I think it was created in '95 and '96. Didn't catch on like the rest of the major leagues. So much competition for eyeballs and a sporting audience in the US, because you've got NFL, NBA, NHL, the MLB, NASCAR, all sorts. So there was, it didn't really catch on how they wanted it to. Now it's taken some time, but because the Premier League really has helped the growth of interest in football in the US. So it's the biggest, you know, it's not the most watched league in the US. That's actually Liga MX, which is the Mexican top tier, because of the huge kind of Latin American demographic that exists in the US. But it's on such a growth incline that clubs so many clubs got head offices out, or not offices out there. Liverpool FSG have a Liverpool specific office in New York. Bayern Munich have one, Spurs have one, Real Madrid have one, Paris Saint-Germain opened up a store on 5th Avenue, Manchester City have opened up one on 7th Avenue, I think. So everyone realises now that the US is a market which is fertile, helped by the fact that the World Cup is arriving in 2026, so you've got 2 years in effect to really kind of latch on to that audience. Everyone's more connected as well now than they ever have been, so access to this is far easier. So the US market accounts for 2 billion of the Premier League's 10 billion in the last cycle for media rights, and it shows you the willingness of broadcasters in the US to pay for this, pay a premium for this. So you've got that, and then you also have things in popular culture, so Welcome to Wrexham, Ted Lasso, all these type of things, they all feed in.
Don't shut up about Welcome to Wrexham, mate. You're just going to be a huge fan.
It killed me to say that as well. I still haven't watched it. I'll never watch it. I told you, I'm so petty. I won't watch anything with Ryan Reynolds. I can't watch It's Always as Sunny in Philadelphia anymore. And it is a shame, because I enjoyed that, but it's completely dead to me now. Danny DeVito is the same thing. He's gone. But yeah, so culturally, there is a big shift in all of this, and the Premier League is at the forefront of it. Now the big thing will be who kind of goes first and has games in America. La Liga is already well far down that road and willing to do it, whereas the Premier League are kind of reluctant to take competitive games there, like we have in the UK. I mean, I went to the Major League Baseball at London Stadium recently, sold out for 2 days. Spurs rely on the NFL for a decent chunk of revenue every year for games. But Liverpool, like everyone else, is going out there this summer thinking they want to try and get a real foothold in the market. They already have, because Liverpool's real kind of selling point is the fact that they have a narrative. And the US audience that may not be attached, but so many people who may not be attached to clubs already in terms of fandom, they look for narrative, a story to tell, and which is why I don't think Manchester City will cut through as well as they should do, given the fact that they have owned a team their owners have owned a team in New York City for the past decade or so. They've been so successful, and they've not really. I think they're probably frustrated they've not been able to leverage that as much as they think they would have liked to in the US. Whereas Liverpool, obviously American ownership, but who in the Premier League hasn't now? They know the US market. They have a kind of a blue collar, I suppose, to use a US turn of phrase, approach to. It's a socialist football club. It's very much aligns with East Coast America, I think, which is where East Coast and kind of the middle America is kind of where that really probably aligns best for Liverpool. And you probably see that it's reflected by where they've gone for the past two pre-seasons in America, because the one previously was South Bend, was it? New York.
They all mix into me, to be honest.
And this one is Pittsburgh, Philadelphia, and
Columbia, South Carolina.
So they are honing in on markets where they think they will have a fan base which will latch on and kind of buy into what Liverpool are doing, which is why I think that Chelsea and the likes go to the West Coast, because it's seen as glitz, etc. And they're not really selling a narrative, they're just selling nice, shiny things. And I think that's, you see that, this is the reason why Wrexham go on a pre-season tour to the West Coast, because it's Hollywood.
Yeah.
All these things, nothing's done it by accident. These things are all done by design. And the Spurs aren't going to the US this summer because they have the biggest Asian football star that there's ever been in Son. So their market there, they're still making hay while the sun shines in the Asian market. So, but for Liverpool, I think they are already quite far ahead in terms of really putting down roots in the US, because they're very good at telling that story and the narrative of the football club. Even recently when they do commercial partnerships, etc., there's a story behind everything they do, and that plays well with the American audience. So I think they're well positioned. But going into this summer and next summer, especially the summer before the World Cup, it's going to be hugely lucrative. So I would be stunned if there is anyone that isn't in America next summer on a pre-season tour, unless Everton are going to Ireland again. I don't know. Maybe gone to Sligo again.
Hey, it's very nice.
Yeah, it is. I love Ireland.
Very nice part of the world.
It is.
Dave, Tom, I appreciate you coming in.
Thanks for having me.